Well, I'm going to begin because it's just about 3:15, and we'll just do a few preliminaries. If people wander in, that's great. My name is Judy Richheimer. I'm leading a panel on how to give a walking tour. And I want to introduce you, first of all, to Susan Birnbaum, who is also a leader of walking tours, as is Nina Mende. But in addition, Nina is, let us call her, an impresaria of walking tours. Let me back up a step. All three of us, in addition to being licensed guides, are in an organization called the Guides Association of New York City, Organic. And you can find our website. It's a pretty nifty looking website, I'd say. And are people who are not licensed guides allowed to come to our meetings? Obviously they can't vote, but do we?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, we do have guests. We have a policy of that guests can attend meetings.
Yeah. So I would say,
with emphasis is on licensed guides.
We're a professional organization. And I'm going to.
I just want your information.
Sorry?
What does a license?
Well, we're going to get to that. I just wanted to set up the introduction, and now I think I'll jump in officially. So the very first thing I want to discuss was exactly what you raised. You're almost like my straight man, because, ladies, wasn't that right? Yeah, this is not me, this is Nina. And the first, do this step by step, kind of chronology, but let me back up a moment. How many of you here have taken walking tours? All of us, okay? How many of you have given walking tours? Okay. So the first thing I want to bring to your attention, and this is somewhat philosophic, it has to do with the fact that in order to give a tour under New York City regulation, you need one of these. This is Nina. Look how cute she is. And to get a license, you need to take a test. What is it, about 200 questions now? Get a passing grade and pay a fee, and then you renew every 2 years. And unless you got yourself in serious trouble with the law in some way, it's just an easy renewal every 2 years, which you can do online.
So are you saying if I give a tour and I'm not licensed, I'm subject to a fine?
Well, you could be. But now I'm going to sort of give you a wider picture on this. Philosophically, and I think that Susan and Nina agree with me, but you can jump in if you don't. It's GANIC's policy, although some people, maybe quietly don't buy into this, that not only are we going to obey the law as it's written, but we believe in it. That we believe in regulation, that this is what exists, this is the city law, and we want to be part of the common weal, part of the common good, and the best way to start is by doing things in the proper kosher way. Now, some people think that it's a First Amendment issue, that there shouldn't be any restriction on giving a tour, especially a walking tour. Anybody should be able to, and theoretically anyone can, but it's a kind of restriction, a roadblock put in your way to have to take this test. Let me just do segment by segment, and then I'll take questions. So let me just get this thought out. But I saw your hand. Okay. And this is giving this will be a little bit more practical than some of the other panels that we've attended today. And this is part of my technique as a guide. When I give a tour, I give an introduction, I see a hand sometimes, and occasionally I'll let people jump in the middle, but I'll try to I always try to segment things so that I can take questions as we go along. So I know that some people have what I call a libertarian point of view on this issue, and you indicated to me, because you said you give tours and you didn't know what a license is. So I just wondered, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe any of you at this point would like to jump in and just talk about the licensing issue. Judy.
I've been a license guide to 2007. The license is an exam on a computer at Department of Consumer Affairs for $50. And it says that you know basically information that you would dispense to a tourist. You get a guidebook called the Blue Book, which is usually the easiest, or any really decent travel book about New York, a tour guidebook. Yeah, it's called a book, it's not a website, it's called a book. And in this day and age. And then you go on to Department of Transportation, rules for tour buses, where buses can drive. And once you look through the rules and see that they can't drive on Park Avenue, and I think it's FDR.
Fifth Avenue.
Which one? Different streets.
Yeah.
I think like Henry Hudson Parkway. Anyhow, you go through the basic information about tourism, and then you go down and take the test. If you pass the test, you get your license. If you pass the test so well, then you get a gold star next to it. And that makes you feel like a professional. Other cities have much, much stricter rules to be a tour guide. You have to almost get a degree in history in most cities of the world to be a licensed tour guide.
Cities, right, yeah, so this is, it's.
New York started this only about 15 years ago with the heavy test. They always had a test.
Yeah.
If I wanted to see the law, how would I find?
Could you, this is actually being recorded. I don't know quite how they're doing it, but so let's speak up. It's one reason I wanted to get you closer, but what you say?
If I wanted to read the law, how would I find it?
It's Department of Consumer Affairs. So you could go to their website, and then if you still have trouble finding it, you could give them a call, and good luck. I wanted to point out, we've had members in this category, people who give tours either for fundraisers or for civic organizations or preservation organizations, and that is the only tours they give. And very often they don't make any money. And they still have taken the test and gotten the license. Because it's entering in, at that, level.
Professional level.
Yeah, professional level. Tour guides do not look very good in the media. I mean, we look even worse in the media than general preservationists. So it's a little bit of a professional patina that I think is important. And then also that we're just basically following the rules of the city in which we, in many cases, live and certainly work. The fact that the city is here, we benefit from that. So I'm now going to jump ahead and talk a little bit. Did someone? I'm sorry, I forgot about you. You had the first question. Go ahead.
Well, I was asking about, let's say, for organizations like municipal art society or historic district council, when they partner with preservation organizations, even though, let's say, for my example, for our group, preserving.
What is your group?
Preserving East New York.
East New York, that's right. I saw you down at the table. Yeah.
Yeah. So we last year we were part of the 6 to Celebrate neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So we gave tours under their
umbrella.
organization.
Yeah.
So I don't have a license. So am I covered by
No, but I won't tell on you. I'm not saying that you're not doing the goddess's work when you give a tour to advance your preservation agenda. That's wonderful. Get a license. Susan, jump in.
The thing is, what happens is...
Louder, though, because not for them. Yeah, because it's being recorded.
All right, so what happens, really, as that there are lots of people in the city who are giving tours. They don't call themselves tour guides, and they give themselves the title educator,
Historian.
Teacher.
Whatever. So, I mean, it just seems to me, as a person who came to the profession, that if I wanted to have the license because I felt that would enable me to say that I am a tour guide, that I'm a professional tour guide. And no one's going, I don't think we've ever had an arrest. However, I think there is a number, if you're walking around town with a certain
I think it's
number
50.
50 people, you really could, you could be stopped and asked for your license.
There was a movie, actually, where an unlicensed tour guide kept getting arrested. It was a remake of that movie. Help me out here, somebody. The rich guy, the spoiled rich guy dates the poor young woman.
Oh, not the hotel.
No. Do any of you remember the name of that movie? No, it'll come to me as soon as the seminar is over. And in any event, she keeps giving the tours in Grand Central and keeps being busted by the police because she doesn't have her license. And I was thinking, if only, but not the case. So now go ahead.
Yeah, just one more thing. It's just a very easy entree into. It's an easy entree into a profession. If you were an actor, you would have to pay thousands of dollars to get into SAG, and you couldn't even get into SAG. You'd have to be in a movie. Or for a lawyer, to be in the bar association. For a tour guide, you take a test, you buy your license, you study for your test. It doesn't take long, but then you could say you're a part of a profession. It's that much more serious that you studied, that you're licensed.
So now that I hope to every 2 years. So I want to, we can, continue this part of it if you want over drinks, but I want to now move into the substance and maybe, a little bit of the philosophy of guiding on the street in general. This was a preservation hold it just a second. Well, hold on to your question.
It's about the part you just spoke about. When you renew the license, do you have to pay a fee again?
Yes.
Yeah, every 2 years. They haven't raised it in living memory.
$50?
Yeah, it's been $50 for at least 21 years, because that's how long I've been a guide.
$75 to take the test.
Oh, now it's something, okay,
was,
so that's
it was
okay.
different.
I haven't, it's been a few years since I've taken the
You
test.
never have to take it again.
Yeah.
Unless you let your license
Expire,
lapse. Yeah.
right. So this is a preservation conference, and we are now trying to look at how we can take our preservation passion and put it to work, either for our organization or our pocketbooks on the street. And the interesting thing is that preservation and walking tours were sort of born together in New York City. A fellow by the name of Henry Hope Reed in the mid-1950s started working for, this is the man who put me up to this. Hello, Adrian. A man by the name of Henry Hope Reed, working for MAS, started taking people around to build up preservation consciousness. And no, I do not know if he was licensed or not. So what does it take? What goes into creating a walking tour? Well, first, you can think about one before you think about the other. So I first want to address how you create a walking tour. What you want to do is start with your passion. Susan, for example, has a passion for the Bronx, and she's also quite interested in food, right?
This is true.
Yeah, and sometimes she manages to combine the two. Nina, like...
What's that?
No.
No, I'm not.
No. Yes. Nina like me, is more of a generalist, I'd say.
Omnivore.
Yeah, right. We're omnivores, but we have certain areas that either by accident or passion that we have, sort of begun to own. I've been doing the Lower East Side for over 20 years, and I've done Times Square, and I did a regularly scheduled Times Square tour for over 10 years, 15 actually, and you find your niches. Sometimes they are not geographic, sometimes they are themed, and then you need to find a geography that fits your theme, unless you find a group that's willing to get on a subway to go from neighborhood to neighborhood to spread your theme out. Research. That's the first thing I want to talk about. And I want to throw a few of my favorite ways of researching out to you. And I'm going to let Nina and Susan then chime in, and Judy chime in, who is not just a tour guide, but an historian. She's the historian of Roosevelt Island.
Oh, wow.
An archivist, correct? Everything. Okay.
I think I'm taking
Well,
tours.
before Wikipedia was invented, my version of Wikipedia was going to the New York Times archive. And what I would do is put in the address of the building, and I would mark articles only, and I would do the schmear every year, unless, of course, not before the building was built, but every year since the building was built. And I mean, sometimes you get a whole lot of nothing, and sometimes you get bonanzas. We are very lucky. We 3 or 4 are very lucky, and the rest of you who have been doing this, we're very lucky in that since we started, there's been a great explosion of people who have done it for us. Before that, it was totally DIY. Do you have your East New York book with you? Do you want to hold it up? Okay, it's downstairs. But when I first started guiding, there were no such things. It's a beautiful picture book her group has produced, about yay big.
We didn't produce it.
Oh, but you sell it now, and it's those books didn't exist. You could hardly find a good general history 25 years ago of New York City. So you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, but it's like cooking, right? You have your recipe, and your recipe might even be the Blue Book, something that basic, and then you tweak. So one of my favorite, forms of tweaking, New York Times. There is a website, and you're going to have to help me out here, a somebody in New York, an Ohioan in New York. It's a somebody in New York. Anybody want to help me out here?
Daytonian.
What?
Daytonian.
A Daytonian, thanks. A Daytonian in New York. His approach is much like mine. He looks at buildings, does a quick look at architecture. What?
It's a blog or a website?
I'd say it's a website. I just put in Daytonian, D-A-Y. T-O-N-I-A-N in New York. And he's got a menu. He doesn't have every building in the universe. He has it divided, if I recall correctly, by neighborhood. And he will do a quick architectural gloss, and then he'll get into biographies. He probably had discovered my trick, which is going to New York Times archives, because, as I say, if you can, your eyes will glaze over with most of these articles, but sometimes you find a building that is, it just gives you a bonanza of stuff. And I'm going to give you an example. the corner of 34th Street, the north corner of 34th Street and 6th, there is a building, it's where Victoria's Secret is, and I call it the Bad Karma Building. It's a beautiful building. But I kept finding, year after year, one crazy, generally bad thing happening after another. Sorry?
It's like the 10th Street.
Right. Okay, you see, this is interesting. Susan raised the 10th Street house, and in a second, I'm going to ask her to explain that. But that's been well documented. Sometimes you can come up with stuff that nobody else has just because you got lucky. At this building on 34th, I won't go through every item. In fact, you can find it yourself. But there was a spy who had his office there. There was a thief, an office boy who was a thief. This is how the New York Times put it way back around 1900. Office boy steals key. Now he's locked up. And it was, one event like this after another. So, stay on that New York Times quest. I think it's going to pay off after you've done your basics. You want to talk about the 10th Street building?
Spouted it.
No, I don't remember my specifics on that.
Mark Twain lived there. I forgot the number. East 10th. It's West
Between
10th.
5th and 6th.
West 10th.
Yeah.
The one that had the explosion?
No, it's
11th.
down the street from the explosion.
Around the corner, actually.
But it's one of these maybe haunted houses. Mark Twain had his wife got sick there. Then the people who owned a restaurant also had problems there. But it just seemed to have bad karma. And then Lisa, the little girl who was murdered by her father, Joel Steinberg. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
They lived in that.
14 West 10th Street.
Thank you.
Yeah.
14 West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to actually turn this over to Nina for a few minutes, because remember I said standard tours tend to be geographic, but sometimes they're more themed than strictly geographic. Sometimes the two come together. So, a perfect example of this would be street art in Bushwick. Now, there's street art other places, and there's other things to care about in Bushwick, like hipsters and food, right? But, but a big theme for Bushwick, street art, right? Okay, so Nina, through the Guides Association of New York City, is the head, she's in charge of sorting out tour ideas. We guides like to give tours to one another, and because it hones our craft, and then we go out and sell them to the outside world. So for free or some tips, we maybe a drink afterward, we give tours as part of our educational mission to one another. So Nina, why don't you talk a little bit about how you pick and choose, how you shape, and so on?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm education chair at the Guides Association of New York City. Susan was on the education committee, and what we do, we finally have a little form, what we call we do for tour guides familiarization tours for tour guides. So tour guides get to learn about things, but this would be helpful for anyone doing a tour, is who you're targeting the tour for. Who's your audience is good to keep in mind. If you're going to give a tour for high school students, or you're going to give it for senior citizens, that is helpful to know who your audience is. And also specifics for, let's say, one neighborhood. Let's say if you were doing a tour of Greenwich Village, that's a big area. You can do a ghost tour of Greenwich Village, and visit Edgar Allan Poe's house as one of the stops on the itinerary. You can do a book lover's tour of Greenwich Village, and visit some authors who lived around that area.
The site of Edgar Allan Poe's house.
The site, yes, the site, once called Amity Place, right? So, yeah, and also you could give a tour. I know someone gave a meatball on McDougal Street tour of his Italian-American history and visit, I think, it's St. Anthony's Church and different, so there are different ways. So you just to set up a tour, you need a starting point, an ending point, how long it's going to be, and just research each of the sites that you're going to visit. Yeah. And we in terms of preservation, we're very proud. We have wonderful members who are part of the Guides Association. I'll just drop one name because he's very a preservation activist. Some of you may have heard of Joe Sablack. And he's a champion of the Lower West Side. There are 3 buildings he's trying to preserve on the Lower West Side, and that is a part of his tour when he does downtown Manhattan, Manhattan's Lost Neighborhood, which was once Little Syria. At some point, he will visit what was remnants of that old community. I don't know if I'm touching on it.
Right. So, I'm going to have you hold this. I have my own. So let me give you some practical tips, and then I'm going to open it up to you. You might have some tips to share with us, and you might have some questions. Nina mentions a start and a finish point. In terms of research, now, a lot of this has to do with how long a lead time you need with your client. Because the first thing, especially MAS wants from you, right, is what is the start point? And they need that months in advance. I'd say if you could possibly avoid getting yourself pinned down to a start time for your first tour, avoid it, and then, when you get closer to the tour, set the start point. Why? Because ideally, you want to do all your research, which can take a month or 2. Writing a tour is very much like researching an article and then kind of turning it into an essay. It's somewhere between straight reportage and an essay, because you want a point of view in there, but you want a lot of facts to back up your point of view. So you don't know, in terms of where your story is going to go, where your story should start. But very often your client, and the perfect example is MAS, they're setting up their calendar months in advance. They want that start point. So you live with that. And if you do the tour again and you find that there's a better start point, then grab that one. Because it's like an opening sentence. It's not like, it actually is an opening sentence to a story, an article. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then you also need a good spot to dismount, so to speak. It's where the story ends. So you want to kind of, bring the whole story together, and you'd like it, even if it's a real stretch, even if it's a little bit of a bullshit connection, you'd like to bring the narrative alongside the visual. So some practical things.
You also want it, if possible, to be accessible to public transportation.
Yes.
And in a place, ideally, without a lot of background noise.
Right. Some of the practical tips have created real challenges for tour guides. I was talking to Nina and Susan about this earlier, that, ideally on a hot day, you want to be in the shade. On a cool day, you want to be on the sunny side of the street. But now you might have different priorities, but I say try to accommodate your guests as well, your tour takers as well as you can, but you are putting on a show, telling a story. It's your stage. You might not always be able to make it as physically comfortable as as you'd like it to be, it's more important, I think, to get that story told. So to see the building, the best way to see the building is right here. As I want to point out these paintings to you. Actually, if I wanted to point out the orangey paintings, right? This is where I would be. I would not be here, because you want them facing you in case they want to make eye contact with you, but you always tell them, this is one way it comes in handy to be short. I always say, look over my shoulder. I'm always talking about what's behind me. So your first instinct when you're first starting out giving tours is you're facing what you're talking about. You got to do a lot of practicing, so you're going to be talking about what's behind you. Memorize the details so that you do know, or just very little, turning around and checking things out. People, will be looking over your shoulder. This is a case, I'll get to you in a second, this is a case of do what I say and not what I do. These shoes are not great for giving a tour. These shoes are great. These shoes are great. You see? Flat and comfortable. What else should we tell them for practical purposes?
So I always say I got my start sort of trial by fire, not on walking tours, but jumping on the top of a double-decker bus with someone else's script. And I learned, one, to be concise, because people's attention, a walking tour is a walking tour. It's not a talking tour. If you want to give a lecture, you're in a classroom, and, so you have to keep things moving. And also remember 5 senses. Smell, New York, I don't know, I cut off the smell, but you want to give people photo opportunities. Like Judy says, for instance, I do tours of Wall Street. I point out this is an iconic view of Trinity Church, or you want to go inside as much as you can go inside a site. That's always so much nicer than just seeing an exterior. If you have a chance, an experiential taste of giving someone a taste of a neighborhood, that is always a highlight, so all the senses. And how I go about it is I make an outline, figure out, my itinerary, the sites I'm going to hit. Let's say I'm going to hit 15 places. And then I have index cards, and I do, the research on the 15 places. And for me, because of my background of having prefab tours and having been thrown on buses and basically giving a script that I had to make personal, I've learned how to make anything work wherever it works. So if we're ending the tour in front of the 9/11 Memorial, I'll find an ending for the tour, you can make anything work. It's a creative exercise. You can make any juxtaposition work. If it's cold outside, you go in the lobby. If it's hot outside, you go in the air-conditioned lobby. But if it's bright sunshine, you go on that corner and you take those wonderful photos and you talk about the World Trade Center site behind you and everyone sees it.
For a second, I want to get you, hold on to that. For a second, or give it to Susan. For a second, I want to get back to the research question, because this is something that I found is sometimes successful, and that is oral history. And sometimes the oral history is going to come from people taking the tour. So should I tell them the prostitute story?
I'll tell the story. Okay,
good. All right. So I give a regularly scheduled tour through the Business Improvement District of the Lower East Side. It meets beginning in April, goes through the end of December. It starts in front of Katz's. And I've been doing this now for about 20 years. So if you've read up at all on the Lower East Side, you know that Allen Street, among its other identities, had a lot of prostitution. So, I presented that. And there happened to have been a woman on the tour. It was about 20 years ago. She looked about 100 then. Let's say 90. And she said, I grew up on the Lower East Side. And she said, yeah, well, everything you said is true. You bring in the elevated train You can even show them a picture of the elevated train. You say, this probably is what contributed to prostitution and crime taking place on this street, because, you have the camouflage, the elevated. She said, oh, yeah, that's true. But did you know? She said, first of all the kids in the neighborhood, and this must have been about 1910, 1920 at the latest, knew what was going on Allen Street. And everybody knew that on the east side of Allen Street were the Jewish prostitutes. On the west side of Allen Street were the Italian prostitutes. But the Jewish customers were on the west side, and the Italian customers were on the east side. Very good. Okay. So, all right. Now you have to be very careful. I don't think we're held quite to the same standards as reportage, and I mean rather the printed word, but very close to it. You may as well aim for it. So you can cover yourself. If you get a story like that and you find there's no way to check it, and I was never able to confirm, deny, you say, just as I told you, a woman who grew up here told me this. And I've said to my fellow guys, this is where you can fudge. You can say, a woman who grew up here told me this. So Susan's entitled to that. Nina's entitled to that. Susan's entitled to that. You had a similar story?
I have a similar story. So I do a tour on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, and I talk about the fact that Arthur Avenue is named after Chester A. Arthur. I talk about the Lorillard's estate and the botanical gardens, et cetera, and I talk about how the street came to be named Arthur Avenue. And I used to say, well, it's named after Chester A. Arthur. Do you know who he was? Some people know who he was, some people don't. He was a president. And I say, well, one of the Lorillard ladies asked her uncle to name the street after, she was an admirer of Chester A. Arthur, and asked her uncle to name the street after Chester A. Arthur. And literally, a lady says, she was an admirer, she was his mistress, and she was related to the family. And so I just relate this story too, as my source being a woman who was on my tour.
The moral of this is, let me just say the moral of this is sex sells. Okay, now jump in.
Now, wasn't he the second president to be inaugurated in New York City?
Yes.
Yeah.
After Washington. But he was the only one, I believe, who was inaugurated at home.
Right.
So now
well, it was because of the assassination.
Right. McKinley.
Yeah.
So can I now, with your permission, I'd like to throw it out to you all. There's a reason why you came here and not to Simeon's talk. So either talk about your experiences or ask questions.
My grandfather's necktie factory was on Allen Street.
That's another thing Allen Street is known for.
As a tour guide of the Utopian Village of Roseville Island, the stories people bring you, not only on tours, but the visitor center, that is wonderful.
Priceless.
Because the people like to hear people's stories. They like to hear snippets from the times of murders, incest, whatever happened in those buildings. It's really nice to look at ionic columns, but up to a point, in cast iron architecture. People love people's stories. I start out every tour, if it's not a school group, and saying, who here remembers Nelson Rockefeller? And sometimes I go, oh, thank God.
Right.
Because it's really hard to explain the development of our community without people having some relationship. And research is fun. But the people's stories are really, really important. And it's really easy to get them. Sometimes you just talk to a storekeeper, especially if you're doing a neighborhood tour, where you're in East New York. Talk to the guy who has had the bakery for 40 years, or talk to the shoemaker, because that's what people really like. They like to know the honest, first person or family stories about history and about the neighborhood. And my other hint is, if they're benchers, find a place to sit down. Because someone always has to sit. Someone always has a bad knee or a bad back.
Good one, yeah.
That's very good. And bathrooms.
I have my tour so that there's a place for everyone to sit at least some time along the tour. Also, more than 2 hours is, an hour and a half to 2 hours is exhausting. Try standing still for an hour and a half and shuffling along. So I would say 90 minutes.
It's
really
much easier to give a tour than to take one.
That's for sure.
Oh, and I wanted to add to people's stories and ionic columns, the gold standard, though, is if you can somehow tie in an architectural detail with a people story. In Chelsea, for example, you often see banisters and wrought iron banisters, and you'll see a space. You've all, maybe you haven't, but come to my neighborhood, you'll see it on the side streets. And you can stop and ask people, that's another good point, getting people involved. Ask them, what do you suppose, why do you, okay, so here you have bar, 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 and then all of a sudden there's a big space, and then there's another bar. Why is there that big space there?
Boots.
Judy?
Boot scraper.
Boot scraper, exactly right.
Because you wanted to get the manure off your boots. before
Exactly,
you went out for
exactly,
2,000.
right. So that's the stuff that people really love. They want to come away feeling a little smarter, and they love the mashup of the visual with the anecdotal. Anybody else want to jump in? Nina?
Yeah.
You got that mic?
Story. Oh,
Here.
If you're familiar with the territory, you're going through a neighborhood like East New York, and you can have, one of the sites can be a store owner, and you can have someone help you tell the story. I've done that sometimes when I've done Lower East Side. I'll go into a store. I know a store owner. I know they have a great story. Take them in the store, show some pictures, and hey, Joe, could you tell me the story? Could you tell these people? And if it's not all the time, but it's quite nice to introduce people to people. While experts, so-called experts on your tour.
Well, what happens, I think, with some tours is that you may be the only person, if this is someone who is a tourist, a true tourist, you may be one of the only real New Yorkers that the person comes in contact with. So that, I think, is another aspect to keep in mind. So whatever that means, what a typical New Yorker is.
We have at least 3 other people who have given tours. And do you want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Do you want the mic?
No, it's okay, because
they're carrying.
I think,
Go ahead.
is it loud enough?
Yeah.
Loud enough. Well, with being part of the Six to Celebrate program with the Historic District Council.
I'm giving you the mic.
Okay. Testing. Okay. So the focus of our group, our theme was to highlight the buildings that were vulnerable to the rezoning. So we just, like, East New York is a very large neighborhood, and it's so hard to cover, so much in so little time. So we decided to just focus on the buildings that were going to be impacted by the rezoning of Mayor de Blasio. And so, like, the first tour, we actually have one of our members is a licensed tour guide called Farah Lafonte. So she was pretty good in setting up the route, the path of our tour. So we have areas where we could go inside a church and, see what it looks inside, and then we could actually go inside a bakery that's been open since 1928 and talk about, the cultural gem, and then have let people have the opportunity to buy, treats, and then just having places available where people can use the toilet.
That's tour guiding 101.
Yeah, I mean, like, our tour is from, I'll say, 1 hour and a half to 2, the longest, but 2 hours is too much.
MAS is very strict about that 2 hours.
Yeah, what we did at one of our tours that lasted 2 hours was that we actually ended at a party, so that people were greeted with food. So that's what we did in our last tour with HDC. We gave them a tour, but then we expanded the original tour to highlight more buildings, but then also take them to the party spot where they were, they were gonna find some food.
If I'm not mistaken, not much of, it's East New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not much of East New York is landmarked yet, right?
No, the neighborhood has more than 20,000 properties, and only 3 buildings are landmarked. And right now, within the rezoning area, is comprised of about 190 blocks, and we've analyzed that 30 buildings are landmark worthy, but then landmarks just considered one for designation. So out of the 30, we have one that's in the calendar. It's in the calendar.
So there was it wasn't just for fun and education, there was a mission here.
Yeah, it was a mission.
You were trying to get people worked up to oppose this upzoning so that you could keep a nice scale of your neighborhood. How about you? Do you want to join in on that?
From just the practical,
you want I passed you the mic there.
You want to stop at places where your group, especially if it's a large group, is not blocking either pedestrian traffic or even car traffic.
Yep.
And when that's not possible, you want to warn them to make room for passing pedestrians. Also, it's helpful, especially if it's a large group, to wear an identifiable hat or something where the group is easy to spot you and follow you.
One trick I have, and again, this is something you get away with when you're short, especially a short girl. You can sort of play the girl, and you pick out the tallest person, which incidentally is not always a man, and you very nicely ask, would you be at the end? Because then you can always, as the guide, you can always see where the group is. So if you don't have that
On a hike, I think it's called the sweep.
The sweep, right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And I always say to them, in terms of, getting them to keep the sidewalk clear, I ask them to huddle. That's a term they know if they're football fans. Or I say, consider this, consider it as though it's the hugging rule. You have to get close enough to hug me and the person behind. You don't necessarily have to hug anyone, just get close enough. And then I also point out that the city, I hate to say it, hates tour buses. For now, they're neutral on walking tours. Let's keep it that way. So, you got to play that up in a kind of cute way. Sorry, Judy.
One thing that male tour guides are very bad at is using microphones. And it is annoying. You cannot hear in Midtown Manhattan or even Roosevelt Island if the person doesn't. You buy a portable microphone for $29.99. It goes around your belt. It has a little amplifier. I have an earpiece. It makes my life easier. You don't have people craning. You don't have people going, what you say, what you say.
Yeah.
And it's something that so many people refuse to use. And
Are they legal?
Yeah.
They are legal because it's a little portable microphone. Yeah. It's not a megaphone. It's not something that's going to be heard beyond your...
Right.
So you don't need a permit.
No. It's a little portable microphone.
There's a certain decibel level beyond which you need a permit, but this does not reach it.
But the Transit Museum gives their guides a microphone, and the people wear earpieces, which I find
expensive.
Very distracting.
Oh, really?
The people are listening, but they're not necessarily, you don't make eye contact with them, because it's like listening to Wi-Fi or something, Yeah. But I found the best investment I ever got was a rechargeable microphone. It's cheap, it's easy, you plug it in, charge it, you put it on your belt.
There are two arguments there. You're right that, you lose the cohesion and the intimacy when you're doing the Wi-Fi thing, plus it's incredibly expensive. And, but on the other hand, you get the best transmission. What are your feelings about mic versus no mic versus Wi-Fi?
I always, anytime I prepared to use a mic, something went wrong. So it set me off into a tizzy. What I do is I have a small stool that I carry. And I stand on the stool, and I tell people I grew up under the L and I have a loud voice. So typically, I just use my voice.
Well, I always joke, every time I do a tour, at least 50 buses or trucks go by.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a stool, maybe you could find stairs and elevate yourself that way. I had one question, other than about images, other than trying to make sure that they're good, sharp, and sort of eye-catching, and mounting them on board. Do you have any advice about showing images?
I learned the hard way, don't use too many.
It's distracting if you're shuffling through stuff.
Right, it's that also, if you get, in French they talk about le mot juste, the perfect phrase. If you get the perfect image, use it. But if it's just a kind of nothing thing that, only barely reinforces what you're talking about, kill your darlings. I used to, in the course of a 2-hour tour, I used to show like 15 pictures, no longer. What about you, Nina? What's your feeling on that?
I'm just here to try to catch what I can.
Oh, great. Please take a seat. I wondered if we were supposed to.
I tend to see like images, but people nowadays, if you have iPads.
Yeah, they're good.
I see a lot of tour guides, especially younger tour guides, like in their 20s, will use an iPad as, and have all their images in one place, and they don't have to shuffle through them. And the size doesn't matter. I've seen tour guides use very large ones. I use 8x10 that you can slip in your bag when you're done. It depends. And then you don't need sometimes that many images, because if you're right in front of a place.
Look, we had no images today. It's just, just the 3 cute women up front, and that was enough. So I wanted to just say something else about images. I told you I learned the hard way from giving a tour, and then I saw what was the perfect use of imagery. And it was not during a tour, it was during a lecture by an historian, Josh Freeman. Some of you may know the name, great historian of labor New York. And he said, I hardly ever use images in my lectures. He said, but this is irresistible. So the famous image from I think it was Dorothea Lange, from the 30s. It was this family of, I think, people in the Smokies, and it was a woman and the kids, and they were, and they were looking over here. And the theme of his talk was how America really prospered from about 1940 to 1980. And he says, he showed them, this poor down and out family. And as proof, he almost didn't need to give a talk after that. He then showed the exact same people sitting, gorgeous leisure wear, jewelry, sitting in a beautiful backyard in California. And I said to myself, this is so perfect. I never want to use an image again unless it's as sharp, sharp in terms of telling the story as the one Josh is using. You're new to the talk. Are you tour takers or?
Didn't want to miss.
That's great. So did you have any particular concerns, questions, or things you just wanted to chime in on?
Well, I've given tours, but I just wanted to hear tips like this from other operational points.
Well, the first thing we talked about was licensing, and we discovered that some people hadn't discovered the necessity of getting a license. City license, yeah. And what areas do you give tours in?
Bronx.
Sorry?
Bronx.
The Bronx.
Well, I did
Thank you for coming.
I did as part of my job with the Bronx Borough President's Office.
Oh, that's right. We were seated together at the table, and you met Susan, right?
Right.
Okay. And what about you?
Upper West Side, and we just got designated. Yay!
Yay, at long last.
Yeah, with the Morningside Heights Historic District
Yeah.
Committee. And I help run the fundraising walking tours that we have, someone who can really do pretty well. We've had a number of people you've probably heard of, from Dokar to
Right.
Jim Mackin and Gregory, who gave a talk today.
Sure.
Do wonderful tours. So I was just curious as to, you were talking about using pictures, so I'm wondering, our tours are like outside.
Right.
My husband carried around, for Gregory's Halloween tour we did, images, because
Right.
he told true spooky stories about the area. So we used that once, but I was curious as to what you mean if you're doing a walking tour,
Depends.
why are you doing images?
Right, it's same sort of thing. So like, for Lower East Side, I might have shown Reese photographs to show what, the inside of a tenement looked like. Or he's talking about labor history on the Lower East Side, and I'd show that famous,
Where are you? Are you inside somewhere with the PowerPoint?
Nope, outside.
Outside.
Yeah, and as Nina was saying, you could,
iPad.
yeah, use an iPad, or it could be a Xerox, in a folder.
I did once, I gave a tour of Mott Haven section for HTC, I think in conjunction with this weekend. And there was the great railroad station, which stood at 138th Street and Park Avenue. Very impressive. You go there today, you would never imagine that something like that would have been there. So I took something out of the book and gave a copy with so I could show so you could see, because you would never believe my words would never be able to describe how huge this was, what a great change. You go there now and there's nothing.
You hit on the opera murder, because we were talking about doing just the right picture and just the right number, and that described it. My words could never describe. And that's the only time really you should use a picture. So anybody else?
Well, I would say in those lines, I guess the past. That's a time machine. A picture is a time machine. And
Yeah. So, yeah, please. I wanted to, well, I hadn't heard from this lady yet, so.
Preserving East New York.
Hold on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm with Preserving East New York. We're here together, and I'm with Preserving East New York. We're here together, and I am in the process of learning all of the sites so that I can give my first walking tour. I'll say first professional. I went to school for public history, so I had to design walking tours, but I never actually gave a walking tour before. So I was the one that did the research and mapped out everything, but never did the tour. So what was really important to me that stuck out was being able to sit down and offering the people on the tour, just a break to sit down. What if there's nowhere really to
what if there's nowhere to sit? Yeah. Exactly.
What do you recommend in a time where you're resting so that you don't lose everyone's attention, but you still want to keep them engaged, but give them a minute?
You know what the next best thing to sitting is leaning. I look for places for people to lean up against if there's no place to sit. I also sometimes will use stoops if we're in a brownstone or townhouse type neighborhood. The neighbors don't always love it, but you got to be a little careful about that. Did you have any other tips along those lines? But leaning if you can't sit.
Yeah, and sometimes there are parts of your tour that, let's say, sometimes I do some Wall Street tours. We begin a tour in an atrium where I'm giving an overview. And so the overview is the longest part of the tour, maybe it's 7 minutes. And everyone can sit then. And then, then we move around a little. But it's harder to kind of stand in one place if you're talking for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If you're talking for 2. People keep moving. But if you have to stand for, 10 minutes, it's not.
Yeah, and if I see places to sit, I more or less demand people sit, because I say to them, you're not going to get give your feet a rest. You're not going to get another chance to sit for 20 minutes. So, that's another thing that I think is useful, is to give them previews. I mean, don't give it all away. But for example, in the practical realm, you're not going to have another chance to sit for how long? 20 minutes? Then people will want to sit then. Same with water fountains, same with bathrooms, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and I always give people an out. I say, I'm giving a 90-minute tour. I know a lot of you are on vacation. You can leave after 10 minutes, that's fine.
Right.
You're not in school.
Right,
It's supposed to be
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, I make a joke about it. I said, if you leave, that's okay. I have a good support group. I'll get over it.
Also, if there's a way for you to contact people who have registered for the tour,
Yeah.
and you see that the subway is not running, or if they're doing a bus shuttle, or there are alternatives for public transportation.
Right.
You
How to get there.
might want to let your registered people know that.
Right. I think MAS is good about that. I can't remember. It's been a little while since I've given a tour for them. So do they let people know when they're? But we just in general, you can tell people to call 511 or go online, and that have the app. That tells you what's going on. With public transportation.
We talked all about tour guides, and Justin Ferrate's name didn't come up once.
He's in Santa Fe.
Yeah, because we're so heartbroken.
How quickly we forget.
We're so heartbroken that he's abandoned us. And talking about abandonment, I don't want to abandon you. I think we're supposed to, right? I think we're even over budget. So I just want to see if any last urgent things to say, especially any questions. I think you had something to add.
Just keep everybody, everybody's gone to the bar.
Good. Okay,
But,
so a plug.
Just one thing, because we were talking about it. If we always have trouble finding a place to have a lecture inside a hall that doesn't charge an arm and a leg.
Right.
We're constantly looking for places, especially in cold weather or bad weather, things like that. Was that talked about, or did you have any ideas? Because libraries, we have a lot.
No,
of schools
we were talking strictly out of doors. Yeah, and that's another good thing to keep in mind. To tell people at the end of the tour, and then they can even break away in the middle, but rejoin the group for booze at the end. Right? And that's, I think, where we are now, right? Nancy Whiskey Pub. You want to give the address?
Yeah. It's on the map, which I have in my pocket.
It's a little below Canal. It's a little below Canal Street.
You got to go through to Tribeca Park. You go through. If you're going back to the subway, the A train.
Yeah, north.
I had it, and I'm sorry. Here it is. Somebody else had it. It's called it's called the Nancy Whiskey Pub. And I don't have an address, but it's on 6th Avenue. What is that?
Is it West Broadway? No, it's
Lispinard and 6th Avenue. The Nancy Whiskey Pub. It's east of it.
Is it south of Canal?
It's West Broadway meets 6th Avenue, meets Lispinard. You've got to go through the Tribeca
I know
Park.
it by homing instinct, so if anybody wants to follow me, please do.
It's 4 blocks north.
Yeah.
North, slightly east.
I just have to get my coats downstairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.